So there's a male dominance in the Catholic Church in regards to physicians.
We have a lot of similarities with the Catholic Church. We do not worship them.
Would you say that's true or false? How does one physically, mentally, emotionally fall in love with active prayer?
The intercession of the saints is a very big part of our theology and our practice.
Yes, I'm religious, but no, I'm not a freak.
People tend to become atheists not because of their philosophical beliefs, but because of their personal conviction of sin.
If you have any questions, as usual, please email us sg101@cycnow.com, and we will get back to you as soon as possible.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Q&A Live on CYC. Tonight we will discuss grief, an important, normal response when experiencing any kind of loss. And we have a very special panel tonight. We are joined tonight by Charbel Iskander, who's a superintendent of St. Mary and St. Mina's Church at Bexley. Welcome, Charbel.
Hi, Tess.
Thank you for joining us. And also David Farag, who's a psychologist, and he works in private practice dealing with pediatrics. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Tess.
Thanks for being on the show with us.
No problem.
Before we get into our conversation, we're going to watch a very short video on grief, so if you can please stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a few moments.
We often say we're heartbroken, but it might be more accurate to call it brain broken, given the role the brain plays in grief. As your brain adjusts to the loss of someone you love, you might feel numb, depressed, or foggy. But moving through the stages of grief is natural and healthy. It helps you process your loss and begin to move forward over time. This is Your Brain On, where we explore how the world affects our brains and ourselves. The experience of grief is twofold: the immediate acute pain of the loss, and the months afterward as you mourn. The loss of someone meaningful functions as a stressor, triggering the pituitary gland at the base of the brain to produce adrenocorticotrophin, or ACTH. ACTH sends a signal to the adrenal gland to release cortisone, a stress hormone. Unlike, say, a temporary threat, grief is an intense, persistent stressor, so your body remains flooded with cortisone. That can cause your immune system to falter, making you feel run down. This is likely why some bereaved spouses fall ill soon after their partner dies. Even if the death of your loved one was expected, the actual event can still feel like a shock to the system. In the short term, a traumatized brain is bottom-heavy, meaning primitive areas, including the fear center, are overactive, adding to feelings of stress and despair. Meanwhile, higher cortical areas of the brain are underactive, like the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate emotion. You may find it difficult to let go of minor annoyances or experience symptoms like increased heart rate for several minutes after you're startled. However, over time, the initial shock of the loss typically gives way to a deep sadness or depression as you continue to mourn. Depression can cause widespread changes across several parts of the brain, including the amygdala, which regulates sleep behavior and mood, and the hippocampus, which processes memory and regulates stress hormones. These changes disrupt core functions of our bodies and minds. As you grieve, you may find yourself sleeping too little or too much, forgetting things, or trapped in a brain fog. These feelings are difficult, but the acute pain doesn't last forever. Eventually, the sadness begins to lift at least a little bit, and then you may move on to feelings of anger or guilt before slowly moving toward acceptance of the loss. Experts agree the bereaved follow their own individual timelines, but in general, this three-stage process usually takes about a year. There are steps you can take to feel better as you go through the grieving process. Talk therapy can be a major help. This might be group bereavement meetings or cognitive behavioral therapy, which can redirect negative thoughts. Aerobic exercise can improve mood, memory, and thought processing. Talking with friends about the person you lost can be a great comfort too. Studies show long-term grief actually activates neurons in the reward centers of the brain. And recalling the time spent with those who have died reminds us that the memories still live on.
Welcome back, viewers. This is a live show, so please either call us if you'd like to ask your question, or send your questions. Text them please to 0416 551 292. I'll be happy to ask our wonderful panel for you. Charbel, can you please explain a little bit about grief as a normal response to loss and how it manifests itself in people?
Yeah, I've got a textbook definition for you. So grief is an experience of deprivation and anxiety which can show itself physically, emotionally, cognitively, socially and spiritually. These losses could be the death of a spouse or a friend, a loss of a pet, loss of a job, or a home, an end of a friendship. So these, so grieving though is a very normal process, and everyone goes through it, and it can have, the grieving itself can have intense sorrow, pain, loneliness, and sometimes it shows itself physically. So people could stop eating, for example, or eat too much, maybe stop leaving home and staying home all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of, are other sort of patterns like, sleeping and physical activity, how does that weigh out with grief? Is that a normal thing that would happen during the grieving process, or?
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly some of the effects of grief can impact sort of the big aspects of life, like sleeping.
Yes.
As the video said, sleeping too little or too much.
Yes.
You can have those significant fluctuations in diet and appetite.
Yeah.
Again, putting lots of weight on or losing lots of weight, just I suppose depending on the person.
Yes.
So you can have those extremes in reactions, absolutely, and every person is different. I think that also depends on the situation as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so, Charbel, just going back to the stages, if you could call them normal stages, because, of course, in doing the research on grief, everyone experiences it very differently. So what do, I guess, most people consider to be the normal stages of grief?
Yeah, so there's 5 stages of grief, and the first one is denial, and that's like a defense mechanism that buffers the initial shock and really numbs the emotions. After that comes anger, and you'll ask yourself questions like, why has this happened? Or why has God done this to me? Or if I was there, something, if I was there, this wouldn't have happened, for example. Stage 3 is bargaining, and especially us as Christians, we try to bargain with God where we say, if I do A and B, will you prolong this person's life? Or for example, I've heard parents who love their children and they say, could you take this disease away from my child and give it to me?
Yes.
So it's that bargaining with God. And stage 4 is depression. This is where the reality really sinks in. The death has happened. The person has accepted that they're sick, and the feeling of loneliness or emptiness or sadness really starts to kick in.
Yes.
And the 5th stage is acceptance, where the person accepts that it's happened, the death has happened, they've got to live with this sickness, but there's more of their life that they've got to live, and they live their life while experiencing that death or health problem.
Or loss. And I probably a lot of the time we'll spend talking about, a loss of a loved one, because that's very prevalent in our life. One of the major things that cause us grief, but also there are things like loss of job, as you said earlier, like loss of a pet, loss of a relationship. And so I guess that acceptance is, it really has a lot of sort of challenges no matter what regard. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that ties into loss of identity as well, which a lot of people don't think about when they go through grief or bereavement or are experiencing some degree of loss. Because usually you know, their identity is tied up to something or someone else. And when that happens, it's almost like you're losing a part of yourself as well that you suddenly have to come to terms with, and you can't do anything about that. You're now faced with this idea of you've lost part of yourself and you have to try and regain it or remold it somehow.
It really is a life-changing experience, isn't it? Because what you're saying, if you lose that part of yourself, then life just changes, and we have to somehow reinvent or whatever we need to do to get through.
Yeah.
So, David, could you maybe talk about the when grief becomes unhealthy?
Yeah.
What should we look for, or what, you know, if we're experiencing certain things, when should we maybe seek help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really important concept to talk about. Charbel mentioned the stages of grief before, and it'd be quite nice if, I suppose, when we experience grief, you know, because we have to, we can't avoid it, that it would logically follow that progression of steps and ideas. But unfortunately, like most things, it can take an ugly turn or an unhelpful turn, and it can develop into what we call pathological grief. And there is a significant difference between normal grief and pathological grief. So that's when, I suppose, you're experiencing the same symptoms of grief, but in greater intensity. So intense shock, intense denial, intense anger, intense depression. So you it's the same kind of symptoms, but suddenly they're much more raw.
Yeah.
And not only are they raw, they're also experienced longer. So the symptoms are longer in duration. So not only is it more raw, but it's longer. And what then tends to happen subsequently is that individual can develop their own mental illness or mental health concern. So they might, kind of similar to what the video was saying, develop those concerns with sleep or eating. You might have low mood or low motivation. You might have that irritability or that social avoidance where we don't really want to engage with the outside world. But of course, on the extreme end as well, we get the concerns around self-harm and harm to others as well, and that's all part of the picture. Yeah. So pathological grief is an important concept, it's a serious concept, and it's one that we have to be aware of and be able to identify in order to appropriately deal with.
And how do we identify that, Dave? Because when we're going through grief, it's something unusual to us at that point in time, to what our normal routine and our normal life is. So one would expect we're going to experience some very uncomfortable things. And maybe we could sort of say to ourselves, well, you know, I'm expected to go through what is what we could call the effects, or when should the alarm bells ring? Yeah. And not just for the person suffering the grief, but maybe loved ones who are trying to support them and watching them.
Well, I think it's important to remember that every person is different, and therefore their experience of grief is going to be different. So just even accepting that and acknowledging that for yourself is really important, that there are no two cases that are going to be the same. I mean, we have these stages, and that's a pretty broad stroke of what the general population experience, but it is different per person.
Yeah.
But if I just speak generally for a moment, I think what some people can consider are the three key processes, I suppose, to pathological grief, and then the three contributors to grief as well. So I'll start with the processes. First one is called splitting. So basically we, in our own minds, split the difference between what I intellectually and logically understand is grief and the emotional experience of grief.
Right.
So we can all conceptualize the idea of what grief and loss is.
Yeah.
But in my mind, when I'm going through it, I might focus on that and try and avoid the emotional experience of grief. Okay. And that's where we're trying to keep our emotions aside, park them over there, and forget them, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
Which, as we know now, is not a helpful way of dealing with it. The second, I suppose, key process is internalization. Yeah. So where we're really focusing on the memories or the positive experiences or even just general experiences that we had with our loved one who's passed, but focusing on them internally. So we're keeping them all to ourselves, we're not sharing them with the outside world. And it's almost to the point where we've kind of forgotten what's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've kind of let go of the reality of the situation that we've lost this person because we're so internally focused on what we're trying to keep alive, those memories, those positive experiences.
Yes, yeah.
And that's unhelpful.
Yes, yeah.
Conversely, the third process is externalization. So where we're obsessing or fixating perhaps on an object or an item that belonged to the loved one that passed.
Yes.
And again, it's to the detriment of what's happened in reality. So we're no longer focusing on the fact that they've passed. We're trying to hold on to that memory through that physical object.
Sure. And what about some of the effects of grief?
Yeah, so there's plenty of effects of grief. So we've got emotional effects and physical effects as well. I suppose just to run through some of the broader ones, guilt is a really big one, where we can start to reminisce and reflect on all those previous experiences that we've had with our loved one that's passed, and start to count them as lost time perhaps, and we start to feel guilty as a result of that. So that can be something that deepens the sadness,
grief.
I suppose, and the grief. A big one though is helplessness. So that feeling of being unable to prevent the loss or being unable to help or to feel almost like a bystander where you're just watching it unfold and there's nothing you can do to prevent it or to stop it. That feeling is quite a significant contributor to grief because of course we want to be there, we want to help, we want to, if we can, do something to prevent this from happening.
Sure.
And we can't.
Yeah.
So that feeling is quite a big one, but as well, if I can just quickly add this in, the feeling of doubt, which is something again that we don't often think about, but that we often do. So that idea of, why did this happen? Why did it have to happen this way? Why did it have to happen at this time? And suddenly those what type questions or what if type questions start to play around in our mind and increase that doubt.
Yeah, and can we talk a little bit about fear? Because I know in doing some of the research for this show, fear seemed to be a very prominent type of experience through. And then maybe Charbel can add a little bit as well from his own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that falls into the idea of the emotional effect of grief, where you've got that fear, you've got anxiety, you've got anger, you've got loneliness, and all those are contributing factors to grief.
So what type of fear are we talking about? Because fear is a very big area,
Yeah, I mean, it could be a multitude of things. It could be a fear of the unknown. Conversely, the fear of the known, so you know what's about to happen, yet again that helplessness seeps in where you can't do anything about it to stop it.
Fair enough.
That fear of what life is going to be like post this point and how that will play out. Will I get the support that I need from others? Will I have support? Will I be able to cope?
Yes.
So there's many different types of thoughts or thinking processes that kind of contribute to that fear. And that's quite logical, it's quite normal. We're about to go through a big life crossroad moment.
Yes,
without the roadmap to deal with
That's
it. And what do you do?
Exactly. We just, thank you, Ray. We're just going to take a very short break. Please join us after the break because we're going to talk about some very useful ideas on how to support loved ones struggling with grief and most of all, unhelpful things to say. So for your entertainment, we have a lovely song called The Prayer, and that's sung by Nora Bunu. And accompanied also with her is Claudio Acosta. So please enjoy and we'll be right back. And don't forget to send those questions in.
I pray you'll be our eyes and watch us where we go and help us to be wise in times when we don't know. Let this be our prayer. When we lose our way, lead us to a place, guide us with your grace. to a place where we'll be safe.
La luce che tu
I
dai
pray we'll find your light
nel cuore resterà
and hold it in our
a
hearts.
ricordarci
When
che
stars go out each night,
nell'eterna stella sei nella mia preghiera.
let this be our prayer.
Quanta fede
When shadows fill our
c'è,
day,
lead us to a place,
guide us with your grace
to a place where we'll be safe. Sogniamo un mondo senza più violenza, un mondo di giustizia e di speranza. Ognuno dia madre suo vicino, simbolo di pace, di fraternità. La forza che ci dai,
we ask that life be kind
il desiderio che
and watch us from above.
ognuno trovi amore
We hope each soul will
in
find
tondo e dentro sé.
another soul to love. Let this be our prayer. Let this be our prayer.
Just like a child,
Just like every child,
need to find a place. Guide us with your grace. Give us faith so we'll be safe. E la fede che hai acceso in noi, sento che ci salverà.
Welcome back, audience. Please send your questions into 0416 551 292. So we have a question for you, Charbel. I'm going to actually read this one because it's a bit of a detailed question. So as Christians, even though we take comfort in the certainty of the resurrection and a joyful life with God in heaven, why is it that some of us still go through an incredibly long and sometimes pathological grieving process, whereas others are thankful in the passing of a loved one from the moment a person passes?
Yeah, I think Christ has demonstrated the importance of grieving, and we'll go through just a few quick verses to show the importance of it. He says in Matthew 5, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. You know, not they're sinners, or, you know, cursed are you if you mourn. No, blessed are you if you mourn. When Lazarus died, then Christ grieved. And we'll come back to that as an example. The Lord withdrew himself from the crowd when he heard that John the Baptist was beheaded. Also, in the garden on Holy Thursday, he was grieving the night before his death. And even if you take Saint Mary as an example, when she visited the temple, Simeon told her, "A sword would pierce through your own soul." And that was in reference to seeing her son on the cross suffer and die. Okay, so she grieved, and he prophesied that she would grieve. Okay, but that's one side. However, as Christians, we can always plus one to that, and that plus one is Jesus. Okay, let's take the example of Lazarus. We see Christ mourned, Martha mourned, and Mary mourned. But Martha took a step further, where she actually blamed Christ and said, if you were not here, my brother would have not died. You know, if you were here, my brother would have not died. The Lord answered and said, well, he will resurrect.
Yes.
And Martha responds with, well, I know he'll resurrect on the last day. But if we pause here, it just seemed like such a generic answer, didn't it? Like, yeah, he'll resurrect, you know, like in 2,000-3,000 years in the abyss somewhere in the universe, he'll resurrect, right?
Yes.
But the Lord says something beautiful in the way I think he says it. He says, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. It almost made it personal. It's not like, no, he's not going to resurrect in thousands and thousands of years' time. I'll resurrect him. Yes. He'll live with me.
Yes.
He'll be with me in eternity.
Yes.
He made it very personal, as in Lazarus was his friend on earth.
Yes.
Jesus loved him, and he's going to be my friend, and I'm going to love him in heaven. He's going to be with me forever.
Yes.
He made it very personal, and and what I took note of here was he shifted the attention from the death to the resurrection and made it real.
Okay.
And,
so can I ask, so is that when we see people who've had their loved ones martyred, as we do quite commonly in Egypt and other places around the world, and some of these people can just come out and they're joyful, they're joyous, and they forgive the people who've murdered their loved ones, could be children, could be spouses. Is that because they're looking to that resurrection? Like, what else is there? Or is it because they know that their loved one is in heaven and they have that certainty?
Yeah.
So in their hearts, they're content with that.
Well, I was listening to a podcast recently from an Orthodox priest. I think he wasn't Coptic, and it was a Q&A similar to this.
Okay.
And, the people asked him for a response to terrorism. It was at the time of the Coptic martyrs, the 21 that got beheaded in Libya.
Yes, in Libya.
And people were asking him for a response, and he didn't respond. And they kept asking him and pressing him. And he said, look, I'll because you keep asking me, I'll answer the question. But my answer is, I don't really have an answer, because when I'm angry and upset, I don't want to answer the question or give a sermon. But he goes, I'll give you the closest thing I have to an answer.
Yes. And
he referred to the Coptic martyrs. He goes, I was watching a documentary on the families of the Coptic martyrs, and he was shocked to see that, well, they were grieving, but they were happy.
Yes.
And these are poor families living in Egypt. And they were saying, well, we have now an intercessor in heaven.
Yes.
My son's name will be written in the Synaxarium.
Yes.
And the blood of the martyrs will make the church stronger.
Yes.
And they forgave the the persecutors, or the executors, and they said they loved them.
Yes.
He goes, I don't have a response for terrorism, but that's the closest answer I can give you, and the best answer I can give you.
Which is amazing. And I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience, because I was actually at a funeral today. So it was my auntie's passing, and it's, we all handle it very differently. And things that actually gave me comfort was, first of all, just understanding that whatever we experience, Christ is right next to us, and he's experienced everything that we've gone through. And, even though we can't see him, he's really carrying us. He's carrying us so much. And then I was blessed enough to see my auntie the week before, and she'd had an amazing transformation from being quite scared and quite worried to just being quite at peace. And I said to her, Aunt Vivi, please promise me something. When you go to heaven, you'll remember me. And she smiled, a beautiful big smile. And then I said to her, when you see Holy Mary, because she's Catholic, I said, please say hello to her for me. And she smiled even more. And it was so beautiful.
So much for what's going to happen.
Yes.
You won't worry about the unknown, the future.
So, it is a beautiful thing, of course, to remember. But I guess that thing, it comes with experience as well. Because when you suffer that loss, like I saw my cousin, he was saying, well, I don't know what I'm going to do without my mum now. And it's hard to even talk about things like that. It's a very difficult thing to do in that time. So, so I guess, the being present, the remembering that God is with us. Saying the Psalms and about praying, I guess prayer, I know prayer is very important, but when you're going through times of grieving, sometimes that's not possible, or it's a difficult thing to do. Yeah.
But a lot of people who grieve say they got this tremendous grace from God that they can't explain to deal with the situation. And it's like it's only the grieving people who feel this for some reason.
Okay.
You know?
So that's when you're so close to our Lord, because you cling onto Him.
That's right. And they say God gave them the ability to overcome this grief, and and supports them. And I think God will do that.
Excellent. Yeah, of course. He's always there with us. And just one very quick question. In terms of the grieving, where we talk about pathological, and that we do, if people are really suffering to that regard, we do really encourage them to seek medical help. And of course, we will there's some helplines which I'll go through before we quickly wrap up. And so hopefully they'll appear on the screen. So we have Lifeline. You can call 131114 or visit www.lifeline.org.au. Men's Line Australia, 1300 78 9978, or Beyond Blue, 1300 22 4636, or they have a chat line, and all of those organisations are 24/7. Of course, in Australia, I'm sure in the UK and America, Egypt, all around the world, there will be other such like services that you can call upon. And of course, there's always your local priest. Please don't forget, the church is always open with doors with priests and servants. And I might just add in there as well, I found even through my grieving process, speaking to one of the church fathers was a tremendous help. Yeah, even I think just talking about it, getting that spiritual guidance and support, it's a great thing. We're very blessed to have that. So yes, I'll probably just very quickly before we wrap up, I would like from both of you just a quick line of maybe some words of wisdom you can offer. We'll start with you, Charbel.
I think when you're grieving, have a grieving team that you can go to where you got some support.
Yes.
And you can get some help. Whether it's a church father or a friend or a close person, and definitely add God to that team, because He's your best source of comfort.
Fantastic, awesome.
Yeah, I think I would probably echo most of those sentiments, and just underline, I suppose, that going through grief is a normal part of the human experience and the human process. We should try as much as we can not to shut out the emotions, but rather to embrace them and accept them. And where we have God in the equation, that means we can overcome them.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight. It's been a great blessing. And audience, in 2 weeks' time, on Thursday, the 21st of February, please join us again on Q&A Live at CYC, where we're going to cover the ever-present topic or issue of anxiety. Good night for now. God bless, and I hope you have a wonderful 2 weeks ahead.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
The things of Christianity are very important. The relics of the saints. Why do we have relics of saints? Why the bones of the saints are important. Holiness is a power which can enter into material objects. Monks show a holy relation to nature. St. Anthony himself said, when he was asked, "Father, why you have no book? How do you learn? How do you study? How do you read?" This is my book. This plays to show me that the spirit is like an eagle.
When we speak about we are scriptural church, it doesn't mean that we are worshipping a text. We understand the text within the church. In fact, in any passage, you can choose singing of Christ. When we read a real Orthodox teaching, it's showing us everything. The law of prayer is the law of belief, is the law of life. We can receive the power of His resurrection at any time. We celebrate the feast, we enjoy a great power of resurrection at that time. Like, it doesn't mean the power of resurrection is kept on that day and other days of the year are not there. It's always there.